Hello and welcome to this video looking at all the problems with the opening scene of the 1995 film Outbreak. While Hollywood is notorious for its ridiculous turnaround times on genome sequences, compatible programming languages, novel tech and more, they at least vaguely get most laboratories somewhat right. Well, at least the people who wear lab coats. Outbreak should be an exception to that. It is, after all, a film focused largely on the virology research and epidemiology underlying the outbreak of Marburg virus from a xenospecies, an origin that crossed over and then infected humans. On that basis, the opening sequence is supposed to make the movie appear legitimate. This is done the most realistic way possible, a walkthrough of the laboratory. Yeah. This is going to be painful, but we will painfully and excruciatingly in detail pick out everything wrong with this opening sequence. Rather than spend time on the extraneous details, we'll jump past the checkpoint, just like the Area 51 invasion planned to, and go straight to the lab. Starting off hot, why are there people walking around in gloves out of the lab? The whole point of gloves, like masks, is you wear them to protect you when needed. Take them off and throw them in the bin when done, and then put on a new pair or set or whatever it is when you need it. You don't just wear them all the time randomly, in the laboratory setting at least. Yes, the quintessential scientist pouring liquids between two beakers or a measuring cylinder adjust randomly. How sciencey. Also, pneumococcus and salmonella are both bacteria. Why are they being studied in the virology lab? You know, where they study viruses, hence the name, virology lab? Oh great, now we have the entryway again. It is signed on the other side as BL1, and this could be taken as a Biosafety Level 1, the lowest level of biosafety laboratories, and this would make sense given the rising sequence number later on. Given what's being worked on, it does seem kind of dumb and wrong to start with anyway. Viruses are generally not worked on Level 1 labs, which could also explain why we don't have viruses for the most part here, but this label applies to laboratory settings in which personnel work with low-risk microbes that pose little to no threat of infection to healthy adults. This lab is apparently not intended for that, and you would almost never find the level labs mixed as widely as it is here. Not only is this a problem as we go straight into the laboratory as mentioned, but it is then on the side we see the branches. These branches are open to the world, and no one is having to wash in, wear lab coats, etc. Even the work being done is done on an open bench. There are all kinds of wrong with this. Should we take after the everything wrong with movie sin counter and apply it to this particular scenario? Next we see what appears like it should go on to become Biosafety Level 2 laboratories. However again, open hallways, open doors, everything is open. Everything is open and everything is now contagious and contaminated. Yay! Burn the place with fire is perhaps the only solution, because this should not happen. Laboratories should be separated to start with, and more importantly, laboratories should have a sort of airlock, if you will. That is to stop air from leaving a laboratory, except when it goes through filtered routes. That ensures the air is scrubbed, and all the unwanted content, particularly pathogens, cannot escape. The hallway should have a set of 2 doors. The first door you enter, the door will close, and then you leave in the second door, but the inside door that you leave through to go into there should be a barrier that ensures the entirety of the inside of the lab remains low pressure. This will pull any air from that airlock into the research area. This will stop anything airborne getting out through the door you enter into. This is very obviously not the case. Biosafety Level 2 is used when you're working with things that could be associated with human diseases. So again, you don't necessarily need to be particularly nasty diseases, but it can cause some harm at least in theory. For example, if you're working with, let's say, more aggressive strains of E. coli, that would require Biosafety Level 2. Whereas if it's just effectively regular E. coli, you could do that on biosafety level 1. Now, once again, we look at the biosafety level 2 labs, and again they're open to the world. Biohazard signs are nice, but they don't mean much when it comes to accreditation. You need physical barriers, not signs. Otherwise, these are not biosafety level 1, 2, 3, or whatever. They're just pretty signs that are make-believe. Further, Lyme disease is a disease caused by a bacteria again, not a virus. Biosafety 2 is worse in some ways. They seem to have just straight up gone to more serious protection that isn't needed. Face masks, and especially something like these N95s, are not needed. The use of PPE, personal protective equipment, will include things like lab coats, gloves, and eye protection in a biosafety level 2 lab, and occasionally face shields, but not masks. Also, what's with that guy that just pulls his mask off? If the diseases were airborne and the mask's necessary, now his hands are covered with the disease and he's just carried it off elsewhere. He didn't even wash his hands. We're hoping he doesn't go to the toilet or to any sort of staff lounge, because now everybody's got over the fun things he's been playing with. Of course, we also have the requisite guy just fiddling with valves. Why not? What is he doing? At least HIV is mostly right as a biosafety level 2 pathogen. That's one they've got. Biosafety level 3 laboratories typically conduct research or work on microbial organisms that are either dangerous or exotic. They can cause serious diseases or potentially lethal diseases, but generally speaking, we're talking about something that's going to be inhaled. And common examples of this are going to things like yellow fever, West Nile virus, and bacteria that cause tuberculosis. You'll note that most of what they're doing here doesn't really cover that, but it importantly doesn't jump straight to using jumpsuits. Waterproof aprons are often good enough for this, and they're far more comfortable and cheaper. Further, the design of the laboratory should account for the fact that many of these pathogens can become airborne, something none of these laboratories really seem to have done very well so far. You certainly don't need to work on anthrax in a level 3 laboratory. You can actually work on it in a level 2, ironically enough. It's not that dangerous so long as you don't go around trying to sniff every agar plate you find. It does bring us to something we've been looking for in every laboratory so far, a biosafety cabinet of a kind. Unfortunately, these are not actually biosafety cabinets. These are for chemicals, not biological agents. It is basically a fume hood. It's intended to draw gases away and stop you from being poisoned that way. Something that should be present in all of the laboratories as well, mind you, so it's not as though this should be just here alone. What they should also have, and importantly has been missing and will continue to be missed, are laminar flow hoods. These are intended to stop whatever you're working on from being contaminated and prevent you from basically becoming infected by it. Even then again, we see people walking around in and out of laboratories as though it's nothing, while another guy gets changed in the lab. Again, what is the damn point? If you're going to just wear your regular clothes in the laboratory, you've already been exposed to it. Why worry about getting into a jumpsuit? The jumpsuit doesn't do anything at this time. You're already contaminated. Next we get to see a laboratory with animal housing built in. Oh wait. No, this is going to piss off the animal activists like Peter. But monkeys, mice, and other research participants are not kept in cages like this. They may temporarily be transported like it, but not kept. There are in fact standards for animal care and welfare, one of which is space to move and be happy when they're not actively involved in the research itself. This is something similar to basically a zoo exhibit, except it's, well, not open to the public. No animals are kept like this in the laboratory under typical circumstances. More so when you realize most laboratory space is very precious real estate and wouldn't be wasted on animal housing like this. That is, assuming there was no other possible circumstance. Finally, we start to get towards level 4, and on the way, what are we seeing? Are those meant to be cryo-storage tanks? Why? That is an incredibly bad location. Really, it's impossible to access, and more problems again. Is it meant to be lab coolant? Well, how do they replace or refill it? Is it just a strange setup? This is really not a laboratory setup in any way, shape, or form that's ever had an actual researcher involved. At least, technically they do have an airlock. There were 2 doors, but still, no one is scrubbing in. They also get dressed in the same place that they are keeping their belongings and maintaining the suits. So what point is there in the inflatable jumpsuits? All you do is cause your belongings to become contaminated. Even if they're in those cabinets, any contamination will be on the surface, and because you're getting out of the jumpsuit in the same environment, you will be touching those surfaces that are contaminated. It doesn't really matter that you've basically set up in a level 4 lab for the research itself. You've brought the contamination out with you. Further, why is nothing in the fridge labelled? Literally, nothing but the door has a label. No dates, no names, nothing. They might as well put it all in the bin. Except you can't. There have been no biohazard material disposal bins. None. In a virology lab, where everything is a biohazard. Yep. Further to all these very glaring problems, there are a number of less obvious issues we also need to be highlighting. The first is that there is not a single laboratory book to be seen. A lab book is a permanent fixture in a laboratory. It does not leave the laboratory. It is a record of everything you do. Everything. It is basically your paper trail to ensure that you and the laboratory are covered in the case of something like a virus outbreak. And they can also show that this was done on this day with these things, therefore they aren't responsible, or conversely, a good lawyer can show that X, Y, and Z did occur and therefore they are responsible. It's also a record of your research, so that if there are allegations of misconduct, you can present the book and go, here are my original findings, and here is proof that I did do what I claimed. Another thing we haven't seen is a incubator. Well, we've seen one possibly that was tiny in the first laboratory, but given the number of people in this laboratory and the semi-activity, there is no evidence of an actual large incubator. These are typically something the size of a walk-in fridge, and they're intended to be maintained at a set temperature with a set humidity so the bacteria can be grown, particularly useful if you're trying to grow bacteria to then grow viruses within them. And yet, there was not one of these to be seen. We've seen plenty of other things that look like they should be parasitic organisms, and we've seen plenty of indicators that they've been doing something, but nothing that actually shows they have a way of growing their viruses, which has us questioning what exactly they're doing, as the few monkeys we see aren't enough. There's also a whole bunch of problems around their aseptic technique, which is a bigger issue again, but that really just ties into the a lack of being able to operate in a sanitized manner. Things like washing your hands, not touching your face, not wearing gloves and masks when and where you shouldn't be, and so on. Okay, we could keep going, but you should get the point by now. Like in most films and TV shows, they don't really stick to the rules. That's why OSHA or work safety people should never watch The Simpsons, for example, or physicists watch The Big Bang Theory. This is just ever so slightly more niche. Thank you for watching the video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. And please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.